I was fired on a rainy Thursday. No warning, no explanation, just an email asking me to pack my things and meet with HR. I'd given that company 12 years. Stayed late. Missed family holidays. Mentored interns who now had better titles than me. And all it took to erase it was Chloe. Freshly hired, barely experienced, but with a voice dipped in honey and poison. She'd whispered lies behind closed doors, said I was stuck in old methods, a bottleneck to innovation. The boss didn't even look me in the eye when he told me it was time for change. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My voice had already been drowned out by someone younger, prettier, more compliant. I walked past Chloe on the way out. She didn't hide her smile. She tilted her head, gently patted my arm like she was comforting a fragile old woman. My hands trembled as I packed my things. No farewell party. No thank you. Just silence from coworkers too afraid to be next. I held it together until I got home. Then I broke down on the floor, knees to my chest, wondering how loyalty could mean so little to people I once trusted. Chloe was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. She walked in every morning like the office was a runway, every step purposeful, every word carefully curated to manipulate. She called me ma'am with a smirk, laughed too loudly when the boss joked about old school methods. She played naive when caught in mistakes and always had someone else to blame. The boss, once my mentor, started inviting her into meetings I used to lead. Slowly, my projects disappeared from my calendar. Feedback I'd written suddenly appeared in her reports. It was like I was being erased, piece by piece. Still, I clung to the belief that truth wins, that people see through the glitter. But I was wrong. I watched her pour coffee for him one day, giggling at a joke that wasn't funny. The way his eyes lingered on her legs said more than any memo. When I was asked to train her for transition purposes, I knew what was coming. And yet I did it. Because I was still holding on to dignity, still hoping someone would notice. No one did. When the final blow came, it wasn't even a conversation, just Chloe's signature on my replacement's welcome email. The boss used to say I was irreplaceable, that I was the backbone of the team. I believed him. I stayed when I was underpaid, overworked, and overlooked because I thought loyalty meant something. He'd once given me a framed photo for 10 years of service. I left it behind when I was fired. I didn't want the memory. I didn't want anything that reminded me I had been blind to his cowardice. The day he let me go, he couldn't even meet my eyes. It's just business, he mumbled. Just business. As if discarding someone's livelihood after a decade was routine. Chloe stood beside him with her arms crossed, like a queen watching her enemy banished. He chose her. Over me. Without question, without pause. I walked out with my head down, not from shame, but to hide the tears I refused to let them see. I told myself I'd move on, that something better would come. But I didn't believe it. Not then. That night, I stared at my ceiling and felt like I no longer existed. My identity had been tied to that office. Without it, I was no one. And that terrified me. Packing up that cubicle felt like dismantling a version of myself. Every photo, every sticky note, every pen I'd collected over the years held memories I couldn't bear to touch. I shoved them all into a box without looking. People walked past me, some offered awkward smiles, most didn't make eye contact. Cowards, all of them. Not one voice spoke up when I was let go. Not one defended me. Even the junior staff I'd mentored looked away, pretending to be busy. Cowards. Chloe hovered nearby, pretending to talk on the phone, but really watching me like a predator savoring the kill. When I left the building, no one held the door. The rain had started. I didn't have an umbrella. I walked to the train soaked, box clutched to my chest, heels slipping on wet pavement. A man bumped into me and didn't even apologize. That's how invisible I'd become. When I got home, I placed the box on my kitchen table and stared at it. I didn't open it. I turned off my phone, curled into a ball on my couch, and cried so hard my ribs ached. That night, I dreamt of walking into the sea and never coming back. Chloe's smirk haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, triumphant, entitled, smug. I tried to distract myself with chores, TV, even baking, but nothing worked. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than ever. I wasn't just fired. I was erased. Forgotten. Replaced. I avoided social media because I knew someone would post a photo of the office, and I couldn't stand to see them laughing like nothing had changed. I didn't answer texts. I ignored calls. I stayed in bed for 3 days, eyes swollen, head pounding, wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. On the 4th day, I got up to use the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow eyes. Lifeless skin. But somewhere in those shadows, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not sadness. Not despair. Anger. I wiped my face and whispered, "Enough. If they wanted to discard me like trash, fine. Let them." But I would not stay discarded. I wasn't dead. And if no one was going to save me, I'd damn well save myself. I spent the next week digging through old notebooks, binders, and digital files, chasing an idea I'd shelved years ago when the job got too demanding. It was a startup plan. A platform built on transparency, community-led growth, and ethical operations, everything that firm wasn't. Back then, I had pitched it at a company offsite, and the boss had laughed it off. Chloe wasn't even hired yet. Funny how the thing they all mocked became my only spark of hope. I dusted it off, rewrote sections, researched competitors. I had no investors, no co-founder, just a bank account with barely enough to cover rent for 6 months. But I had something else now, nothing left to lose. That kind of desperation is clarifying. It silences fear. I reached out to people who had also been discarded, brilliant minds who never fit the corporate mold. Some said no, but a few said yes. Misfits, underdogs, and rebels. We rented a tiny co-working space with peeling paint and bad Wi-Fi. But the energy was electric. I could breathe again. I wasn't just building a company, I was building a lifeline. For them. For me. For every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't right for the table. Our first pitch meeting was in a cafe because we couldn't afford a real office yet. The investor didn't sign on, but he listened. He called me a storm in the making. That was enough. We kept going. We shared one laptop between 3 people. Used public libraries to print. I slept 4 hours a night. Cried sometimes from exhaustion, but never from regret. Our product was raw, but it had soul. Clients didn't flock to us, at first. But then something shifted. A mid-sized firm, fed up with my old employer's outdated systems, took a risk on us. We delivered faster than anyone expected. Then another client joined. Then another. One day, I got a call from a woman still working at the firm that fired me. She whispered, "Everyone's watching you. And we're cheering." That night, I lay awake, heart pounding. As it sank in, I was no longer running from them. I was running towards something new. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something bigger. Something better. And every win we earned made Chloe's smirk fade further into the past. Within 18 months, our growth was too loud to ignore. Articles started appearing in business blogs, the disruptors to watch, founders who rose from ashes. One even called me the phoenix of fintech. I laughed at the melodrama, but deep down, it felt good to be seen. We doubled our team. Hired talent that corporations had overlooked, single moms, immigrants, neurodiverse coders, anyone who had been told no too many times. And they bloomed. Investors took notice. So did clients, especially the ones leaving my old company. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was a warning shot. My startup became a movement. The old firm started copying our features, but without vision, it all fell flat. I never responded publicly. Never threw dirt. But our silence became louder than their noise. One day, I was invited to speak at a tech conference on a panel my old boss once moderated. I said yes. Not to gloat. To be undeniable. I walked on stage in the red blazer I once wore the day they fired me. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was respectful. Earned. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt like a storm. By year 2, we were being courted for acquisition offers, but I wasn't interested in selling. Until the proposal came in, not from a rival, from the very firm that had discarded me. Their revenue was sinking. Leadership was crumbling. Chloe had risen fast, but her decisions were flashy, without substance. She'd turned the place into a circus of trendy buzzwords and unstable projects. Clients were leaving. Employees were jumping ship. The board, desperate to keep the company afloat, reached out quietly. I laughed when I saw the email. Then I got quiet. This wasn't just a chance to win. This was a chance to end it properly. To take back the place where I once lost everything and make it right. My team was hesitant, but I convinced them. We don't do this for revenge, I said. We do this for every good person still stuck there, waiting for a door to open. We negotiated hard. Every clause in the contract protected our culture, our team. When the ink dried, I didn't celebrate. I prepared. Because the next time I walked through that building's front door, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as the new owner. The air felt different when I walked back into that building. The same lobby I once trudged through soaked in rain now echoed with the click of my heels. My reflection in the polished glass caught my attention, shoulders straight, eyes clear, face calm. The receptionist, a new girl who didn't know me, smiled politely and handed me a visitor badge. I smiled back, knowing it was the last time I'd wear one. My team followed close behind, papers and laptops in hand. Upstairs, they were waiting, Chloe, my former boss, and a few remaining board members. Chloe sat in the chair I once used. When our eyes met, her smile faltered. My old boss stood awkwardly and extended his hand like we were old friends. I didn't take it. I sat at the head of the table. Let's begin, I said, voice firm. Papers were passed, contracts reviewed. But the real moment, the one I had dreamed of, came quietly. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 envelopes. Sealed. Labeled. Their names written in clean black ink. Effective immediately, I said. Chloe's face went white. My old boss tried to speak, but the silence said more than his words ever could. Chloe stared at the envelope like it had bitten her. You're firing me? She squeaked, her voice higher than usual, disbelief shaking her polished exterior. I said nothing, just nodded once. She stood up, stammering. This is a mistake. I've done everything this company needed. I made us visible. Her voice cracked, and the desperation began to slip through. You don't understand. I was just doing what I thought was right. My old boss turned red, glaring at me. You think you're some kind of hero now? This company raised you. I gave you a chance when no one else did. I leaned forward slightly. You gave me a chance, yes. Then you took it back because someone younger batted her lashes. You threw me away. And now, I'm taking out the trash. Chloe collapsed into the chair. My boss lunged for the document, flipping it open. This is personal. No, I said. This is business. Just like it was when you discarded me. HR entered then, silent and efficient, the same way they'd escorted me out 2 years ago. Now, the roles were reversed. Justice was quiet, but it was complete. They were escorted out just like I had been. No applause, no ceremony, no mercy. Chloe sobbed the whole way, mascara running down her cheeks, her once pristine blouse now wrinkled and wet with sweat. My old boss refused to look at anyone. His pride wouldn't let him crumble in public, but his clenched fists and red face said everything. As the doors closed behind them, I exhaled. A long, slow breath I'd been holding in for 2 years. Then I turned. The remaining staff, some familiar, some new, stood in stunned silence. A few clapped hesitantly, unsure. And then it built, row by row, desk by desk. Applause. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I walked past them, nodded, and entered the CEO office, the one I used to stare at through the glass. I sat down. It felt surreal, like inhabiting someone else's dream. But it was mine. The air smelled different. Lighter. My assistant, a young woman I'd once mentored, came in with coffee. You did it, she whispered. I looked out the window at the city below. No, I said quietly, we did. And I meant every word. Rebuilding wasn't just about replacing people. It was about restoring dignity. I didn't want to become what they had been, power-hungry, blind to talent, toxic in silence. So, I spent weeks getting to know the staff again. I asked real questions, held open forums, promoted the quiet ones who never spoke up before, the overlooked analysts, the single dad in IT who always stayed late, the receptionist with a marketing degree. I tore up the outdated policies and wrote new ones. Transparency, wellness, respect. Chloe's office became a wellness room. My old boss's corner lounge was turned into a collaborative workspace. The energy shifted. People smiled more, laughed louder, stayed late, not out of fear but because they believed in what we were building. I could see it in their eyes. They were no longer surviving their jobs. They were growing in them. One of the board members told me later, "You've done more for this place in 3 months than your predecessor did in 5 years." I just nodded, because it wasn't about showing them I could lead. It was about proving to myself that healing didn't come from revenge. It came from doing better than they ever expected. Hiring Chloe's replacement was an unexpected moment of poetry. Her desk, once a symbol of stolen power, now belonged to someone who had shadowed under me years ago. A woman named Priya, sharp, steady, compassionate. She had been passed over time and again because she lacked presence. What she lacked was arrogance. And that made all the difference. I offered her the position personally. Her hands trembled when she signed the contract. "No one ever believed in me like this," she said. I smiled and told her, "It's your turn now." The press noticed. They didn't call it revenge. They called it redemption. Headlines read, "From fired to CEO, how one woman rebuilt the company that erased her." I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. My work spoke loud enough. Investors returned. Clients doubled. We became a case study in resilience. But the best part wasn't the numbers, it was the feeling. Walking through those halls and knowing people no longer looked down or away. They looked me in the eye. They smiled. They trusted. I wasn't the ghost of a firing past anymore. I was the future walking freely, one confident step at a time. I refused to frame my revenge. But the world did it for me. Quiet articles began circulating. What happened to Chloe? Why legacy leaders are failing modern teams. I never said her name. I didn't have to. She had become a ghost story in corporate circles, a whispered warning at water coolers. Don't Chloe your way to the top. It never ends well. I heard she applied to a few big firms. None called back. Apparently, word gets around. One hiring manager even reached out to me privately, asking, "Is she really as bad as the rumors say?" I told the truth. She's ambitious, yes. But she destroys everything she touches. That was all they needed. As for my old boss, he tried consulting. Wrote a blog claiming he'd shaped great leaders. No one cared. His LinkedIn posts got 3 likes. Meanwhile, I was too busy growing to look back. People often asked me why I didn't gloat, why I never rubbed it in. The answer was simple. Gloating meant they still had power. But they didn't. Not anymore. They were the lesson. I was the rewrite. And every day I showed up with grace was another page they could never touch. Chloe's unraveling wasn't cinematic. It was slow, humiliating, and oddly quiet. I heard from a former colleague that she tried to blame her failure on a hostile takeover. Claimed she was pushed out unfairly, that she had been on the verge of a breakthrough. But the industry knew better. People talked. They always do. Her resume was riddled with vague bullet points and inflated titles. Her interviews were described as style over strategy. And worst of all, the former employees she once stepped on were now in senior positions, people who remembered everything. Eventually, she stopped trying to get hired in the field. Started a blog about office bullying, painting herself as a victim. Irony, it seemed, had a long memory. One day, she sent me an email. Just one line. "Please, I'm sorry." I didn't reply. What was there to say? I had no hatred left. Only indifference. And that was far worse. She had once taken everything from me. Now, she couldn't even take a reply. And that, to me, was peace, not revenge. Not gloating. Just silence. The same silence they'd given me when I needed someone to speak up. It felt like justice had quietly turned the page. My former boss didn't fade quite as quietly. He raged in the background, reaching out to former clients, writing scathing anonymous blog posts, even attempting to sue the board for wrongful dismissal. It went nowhere. His temper, once tolerated in boardrooms, became his downfall in courtrooms. Investigations uncovered mishandled funds, sketchy vendor contracts, and inflated bonus reports. I didn't need to expose him. He exposed himself. The same arrogance that made him dismiss me became the rope he hung his career with. The last time I saw him was on a business panel. He wasn't on stage. He was in the back row, unshaven, taking notes, trying to be invisible. I didn't speak to him. Didn't even glance his way. But I noticed him shrink when the moderator referenced companies being restructured after toxic leadership. He knew, and that was enough. I never needed to destroy him. The truth did that on its own. And while he scrambled for relevance, I stood beside my team, being applauded not for being vengeful, but for being visionary. It was never about crushing them. It was about creating something so undeniable, they'd choke on the success they once said I'd never have. What they had done to me used to haunt my sleep. Now, it reminded me of who I refused to become. I walked the halls of that office with a mission, to never let silence win again. Every week, I set aside 1 hour for open conversation, no agenda, just honesty. Employees came. They cried. They laughed. Some admitted they had been afraid to speak when I was fired. I listened. I forgave. I didn't need apologies to move forward, but giving people room to grow mattered. One of the young women I hired, a single mother who had been rejected from a dozen firms, said to me, "You made me believe I could matter again." That night, I cried, not out of sadness, but because I remembered what it felt like to be discarded. Now, I was someone who pulled others out of that dark place. I didn't build a business just to prove something. I built a sanctuary for the underestimated, the overworked, the silenced. And watching them rise? That was more satisfying than any headline, any press quote. I was no longer the woman who had been fired. I was the woman who made being fired the best thing that ever happened to her. One morning, a bouquet of sunflowers arrived at the office. No card, just a sticky note with the words, "You helped me believe again." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I had a feeling it was from one of the interns I used to mentor, someone who'd seen the firing, stayed silent, and probably carried guilt all these years. I placed the flowers on my windowsill. Let them face the light. That same day, an article broke about our mentorship program, which had grown into a foundation supporting women pushed out of corporate roles. Dozens of them had gone on to build their own ventures, just like I had. Some were featured in magazines. One had been invited to speak at a global tech summit. The ripple was real. We weren't just rewriting one story. We were changing the narrative entirely. I realized then, this wasn't a victory lap. It was a new beginning. Every person who walked through our doors carried some piece of the past with them. And with every project, every pitch, we turned that pain into fuel. We didn't seek validation. We became the proof. The ones they fired had become the ones rewriting the future. That night, I sat in my office, lights dimmed, city lights blinking like stars below. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out something I had kept hidden all this time, my old termination letter. It was creased, yellowing at the edges, but still legible. I read it again. Position no longer required. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been told I wasn't needed, that I was obsolete. And yet, here I was, needed more than ever. I framed the letter, hung it behind my desk, not as a reminder of bitterness, but as a symbol of rebirth. Right below it, I added a plaque. Start here. Grow forward. Never forget. It wasn't about the fall. It was about what came after. People often asked what drove me. Was it revenge? Was it proving them wrong? No. It was something simpler, purer. I wanted no one else to feel the way I did on that rainy Thursday. And if I could stop even one person from doubting their worth, from giving up after being discarded, then every tear, every bruise, every betrayal was worth it. My pain had become purpose, and that purpose had become unstoppable. A year after the acquisition, I got an email invitation. A Women in Business Summit was honoring 10 women who changed the face of leadership. I was one of them. The ceremony was modest, held in a garden hall with fairy lights and white roses. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the sea of faces, young founders, seasoned executives, students with notebooks in their laps. I told my story, not with venom, but with clarity. I shared the hurt, the betrayal, the silence of those early days. But I ended with a truth that had carried me through. Sometimes, rejection is redirection. And sometimes, what feels like the end is the beginning you didn't know you needed. People stood, applauded. Some cried. But I didn't speak to impress. I spoke to awaken. To reach the women still sitting in dark rooms, thinking they had failed. And as I stepped off that stage, I felt lighter. I had shed the last remnants of who I used to be. I wasn't just healed. I was whole. And I was ready to lead not from a wound, but from wisdom. The summit sparked something deeper. I launched an initiative, the Second Start Project, a program for women who had been laid off, pushed out, or silenced. We offered workshops, seed funding, mentorship, and legal support. Within months, success stories poured in. Women who had been told they weren't leadership material were now CEOs. Mothers returning to the workforce were landing six-figure roles. Survivors of corporate bullying were finding peace and power. One woman told me, "You gave me back my voice." And that mattered more to me than any profit margin. The press called me a quiet legend. I didn't need fame. I needed impact. My calendar filled with requests from universities, global panels, even the UN. But I said yes only when it aligned with the mission. I wasn't interested in being everywhere. I wanted to be present where it mattered. We grew slow, steady, and strong. And the more we grew, the more I realized the empire I'd built wasn't made of revenge. It was made of rebuilding, of rewriting, of choosing not to become what broke me. And that made us untouchable. Chloe's face turned ashen when she stepped into the meeting room and saw me sitting at the head of the table. Her eyes darted to the corner, where two security officers stood quietly, hands clasped, waiting. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. "Why is she?" But she couldn't finish. David entered behind her, confusion written across his face, until he met my eyes. The color drained from him too. "What the hell is this?" he growled, but his voice lacked the bite it once had. I gestured for them to sit. The legal team flanked me on both sides, folders in hand. "This," I said coolly, "is your exit interview." Chloe's lips parted, but no sound came out. I opened the first folder and slid two identical documents across the table. "Effective immediately, you are both terminated. Your emails and access have been revoked. HR will escort you out." Chloe gasped. David laughed nervously. "You can't do this." I smiled gently. "I just did." For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like thunder. David stood slowly, gripping the edge of the envelope like it was a ticking bomb. "This is revenge," he muttered, unable to meet my eyes. I smiled faintly. "No, David. This is accountability." He glanced toward Chloe, whose hands trembled as she opened hers. Her lips moved silently as she read the contents. Termination, effective immediately for gross misconduct, breach of company ethics, and creating a hostile work environment. David's letter mirrored hers. She looked up, disbelief choking her. "But you're just an employee," she stammered. "I was," I said, keeping my voice even, until I was asked to join the board and acquire majority shares through one of our top investors. That investor? My mentor. The same one you tried to push out last year. David's mouth fell open. He was sweating now. "You set us up." I leaned back. "No. You buried yourselves. I just handed you the shovel." Neither of them could speak. They just stared at me, completely gutted. I picked up the folder with their final payouts, reduced significantly due to the misconduct clause. Security will escort you out. I suggest you leave quietly. Dignity might be all you can salvage now. They didn't speak another word. David clutched his envelope like it might burn through his hand. Chloe's lip quivered, her perfectly contoured face cracking with disbelief. As they stood, I could feel the shift in the room, like history rewriting itself in real time. Once, they laughed behind my back. Now, every pair of eyes watched their walk of shame. Security opened the glass doors as David paused, looked back one final time, like maybe I'd still be the girl who forgave too easily. I wasn't. Chloe followed, her heels clicking louder than her voice had ever dared. I stayed seated, unmoved, the silence behind them louder than applause. Once they were gone, I exhaled. Not from exhaustion, but release. 12 years of loyalty had been crushed under ambition and betrayal. But today, I reclaimed every piece of myself they tried to discard. My assistant leaned in and whispered, "That was legendary." I looked out the window, where sunlight finally broke through the gray. "No," I said softly. "That was overdue." From that moment on, I vowed never to silence my worth again. And I would make sure no one else in this company ever had to either. The office buzzed in stunned silence. I didn't need to explain what had just happened. People had eyes and, more importantly, memories. They remembered how I used to be talked over in meetings, how Chloe would hijack my projects, how David praised her ideas that had been mine first. Now those same colleagues looked at me with something different, respect, maybe even awe. The boardroom emptied slowly, but one by one, people nodded as they left. Some even whispered thank you. It wasn't just my story. So many of them had endured Chloe's sabotage, David's favoritism, the rot disguised as leadership. The cleaning crew entered quietly to remove their belongings, boxed up and labeled "No ceremony, no second chances." I walked to the office that had once been Chloe's and opened the blinds. For the first time in years, the space felt clean. I picked up a framed quote left on the desk. "Work hard in silence. Let success make the noise." I shook my head and tossed it into the discard bin. Silence hadn't saved me. It had almost destroyed me. No, I would lead loudly, clearly, and with justice from now on. That night, the company's Slack lit up like fireworks. Memes, GIFs, quiet messages of "finally," and "you deserve it." I received a private message from Emily, one of the interns I used to mentor. "I saw what you did today. I've never felt safer in a workplace. Thank you." I stared at that message for a long time. That was what this was about. Not revenge, restoration, repair. For every person who'd ever sat in their car crying during lunch break because of people like David and Chloe. For every overlooked woman. Every silenced idea. Every crushed ambition. I replied, "You're going to build something even better than I ever could. Just promise me you won't stay quiet when they try to dim your light." She responded with a heart. I closed my laptop, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in my chest, not just vindication, but purpose. My husband, Amir, met me at the door that evening. "You look free," he said, kissing my forehead. "I am," I whispered. "I finally burned the cage they tried to keep me in. And I'm not done yet." He smiled. "Then let's make sure it stays burned." Days passed, and the company began to breathe again. Without Chloe's toxicity and David's manipulations, teams collaborated more freely. Ideas flowed, without fear of sabotage. Even the air felt lighter. I didn't force change, I invited it. Weekly roundtables replaced rigid board meetings. Employees who had been too afraid to speak now presented solutions, proud and confident. HR processes were overhauled. Too, no more unchecked power, no more whisper campaigns in break rooms. I made it a point to sit down with every department head personally, not to lecture, but to listen. The finance manager, a quiet man named Julian, broke down in tears when I told him his reports had always been right. "David said I was paranoid," he admitted. "No," I replied. "You were precise. And no one ever thanked you. Until now." Recognition became a cornerstone of our new culture. Not the fake kind, but real, measured, meaningful acknowledgement. That shift spread fast, like a wildfire of dignity. Chloe and David had ruled through fear. I would lead through respect. And even those who once doubted me began to see. I hadn't just taken back my seat at the table. I was rebuilding the table entirely. A month later, we hosted an industry panel. I was one of the keynote speakers, alongside executives from firms who had once looked down on our company. As I stood backstage, I spotted a familiar figure in the audience. David, dressed in a cheap blazer, face drawn, sitting near the back. He must have registered last minute. His name wasn't on the list. I saw no sign of Chloe. Part of me expected him to storm out when he saw me take the stage, but he didn't. He stayed. And when I spoke about workplace dignity and the cost of silencing the wrong people, his gaze never left me. I didn't call him out. I didn't need to. I just let my presence be the answer to every question he never bothered to ask. When the panel ended, he approached me slowly. "You were always meant for more," he said quietly. I just couldn't see it then. I nodded. "And now?" His eyes lowered. "Now I know I was never even in your league." He extended his hand. I looked at it, then offered him a polite nod instead. That was all he'd earned. After the panel, news of our company's transformation went viral on LinkedIn. Articles were written. Podcasts invited me on to share how I overthrew corporate toxicity with grace and strategy. But I wasn't interested in becoming a talking head. My mission was inward, to make sure no one who ever walked through our doors felt as erased as I once had. The board offered me the official title of CEO 3 weeks later. I accepted, but with conditions. Transparent hiring, a whistleblower system with legal protections, quarterly wellness check-ins with anonymous feedback. They thought I was asking too much. I told them, this isn't a company. It's a second chance for all of us. Surprisingly, they agreed. Investors returned. Morale skyrocketed. Even the reception area buzzed differently. Smiles weren't forced anymore. On my first official day as CEO, I walked past the glass wall where Chloe once stared me down. This time, my reflection didn't look small. It looked certain. This wasn't a glow-up. It was a rebirth. And every step I took was a tribute to the woman they tried to bury, the woman who refused to stay gone. On the anniversary of the day I was fired, I hosted a small celebration in the office garden. No balloons, no press, just tea lights, soft music, and a handwritten note on every desk. You are seen. You are valued. People shared their stories, times they almost left, moments they felt invisible. And then laughter. Real, healing laughter. My assistant asked if I wanted to give a speech. I stood up with a glass of sparkling cider and said only this. They both laughed when I cried. But today, I signed their severance papers. Thank you for reminding me that what they tried to destroy was always worth saving. The garden was quiet for a moment, then filled with claps, not the performative kind, but the kind that shakes the air. In that moment, I realized something. I hadn't just changed my story. I'd created space for others to rewrite theirs, too. That's what healing looks like, not revenge, but reclamation. And it's louder than any applause. Late that night, as I sat alone on the rooftop terrace, I looked out at the skyline. The same buildings that once felt like cages now looked like monuments to survival. I took out a small, weathered notebook I'd kept for years, the one I used to write in during lunch breaks, when I had no one to talk to. I flipped to the final page. At the top, I'd once written, "Things I'll never say out loud." Below that, a list of all the insults, dismissals, and betrayals I'd buried deep. I crossed them out one by one. Then, at the bottom, I wrote, "I made it." Not in a flashy, overnight success way, but in the way that matters. I survived, I rebuilt, and I led with heart. Somewhere below, the lights flickered off in Chloe's old office. The chapter was over. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I felt free. Truly, deeply free. And that, more than any title or position, was the greatest revenge of all. She believed in herself now, Not because someone handed her validation, but because she clawed it from the very ground she was buried under. That evening, I didn't go to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. I drove home, parked in front of my small townhouse, and took off my heels. I walked barefoot across the lawn, feeling the earth beneath me, grounding myself. My daughter ran to the door, squealing, "Mommy, you're home early." I scooped her into my arms, burying my face in her soft hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy's really home now." I cooked dinner while music played low in the background. We danced between the stove and the dining table, spilling laughter where there used to be silence. No more crying on the kitchen floor. No more replaying their betrayals in my mind. When she finally went to bed, I sat with a glass of wine and stared at my inbox. David had emailed. Subject: "Can we talk?" I didn't even open it. The woman I was before might have clung to that thread, curious if remorse had finally arrived. But I was no longer her. And I didn't need his words to validate my power. 3 weeks later, Chloe posted a cryptic Instagram story, just a blurry photo of an empty office desk and a song lyric about betrayal. People sent it to me with laughing emojis, assuming I'd enjoy her fall. But I didn't feel anything. Not triumph, not pity, just detachment. I'd outgrown her, David, and everything they represented. I wasn't the woman who needed to prove herself to them anymore. I was building something entirely new. When investors asked to meet, I didn't hesitate. I walked into those rooms without the weight of bitterness, only strategy and strength. And they listened, not because I was flashy or ruthless, but because I had weathered storms and still stood unshaken. My reputation rebuilt itself, not through vengeance, but resilience. The team I assembled didn't just respect me, they trusted me. They'd seen the headlines, heard the whispers, and still chose to follow my lead. And one night, as I sat in a quiet cafe with my laptop and plans for our next expansion, the waiter paused. "Are you her?" he asked, shy. "The CEO who fired her old boss?" I smiled. "No," I said. "I'm the woman who stopped apologizing." Time passed, and people began rewriting my story without even asking me. Articles praised me for turning corporate betrayal into opportunity. Podcasts wanted me to speak on resilience, leadership, and female empowerment. My assistant once joked, "You went from fired to Forbes." But none of it mattered as much as the quiet victories. The mornings I woke up without dread, the joy on my daughter's face when I attended her school play, the peace in my chest that hadn't existed in years. One day, while leading a leadership workshop, someone asked what my turning point was. I paused, thinking of Chloe's mocking laughter, David's smug indifference, the cold HR office. "It wasn't the betrayal," I said softly. "It was the moment I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I saved myself." The room fell silent, pens frozen mid-note. I continued. "Forgiveness is optional. Growth isn't. Don't waste years watering dead soil, hoping it'll bloom." Afterward, a woman in the audience pulled me aside, eyes glistening. "You just gave me permission to walk away," she whispered. And just like that, I knew my pain had become someone else's survival guide. Months later, I received an invitation to the company's annual gala. A courtesy gesture, no doubt, likely sent by a new PR hire unaware of the history. I nearly deleted it, but something stopped me. Instead, I RSVP'd yes. Not for revenge, not for drama, but because I had every right to exist in that space now. I didn't wear something loud. No red dresses or designer gowns screaming vengeance. I chose a simple black dress, elegant and quiet, like the calm after a storm. When I arrived, heads turned, not because of who I was, but because of how I carried myself. David was there, alone. Chloe wasn't. He approached, a cautious smile on his lips. "You look good," he said, voice uncertain. I nodded. "So do you." I lied politely. He tried to start a conversation, to reminisce about the old days, but I didn't engage. I didn't need closure. I already had it. Later that night, as I left, someone whispered, "That's her. The one they fired." Another voice corrected, "No, She's the one who took over. I smiled to myself. That's the version I chose to remember too. David sent another email a week later. This one was longer, filled with awkward compliments and subtle regret. He asked to meet for coffee, just to catch up. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because some chapters are better left closed. People like David live in cycles. They rise, they exploit, they fall. And when they see someone they underestimated thrive, they try to latch back on. But I'd already outgrown that phase. My life was full now, in purpose, in peace, in people who actually valued me. Chloe tried reaching out too, through mutual contacts, even sent a vague apology through a third-party message. I accepted it quietly, but didn't invite her back in. Some apologies don't require reconnection. They're just acknowledgments, and that's enough. I built something better without them. I didn't need their guilt to validate my growth. Every time I stepped into my new office, I felt the absence of their toxicity, like clean air in my lungs. And for the first time in over a decade, I loved what I did. Not for the title, not for the power, but for the freedom it gave me to finally live. The office walls were different now, brighter, warmer. Staff meetings began with gratitude, not tension. Mistakes weren't punished, they were used to teach. I knew what it felt like to work in fear, so I built a space where people could breathe. One afternoon, a young employee nervously approached me, tears in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she said, voice shaking. "A big one." I sat her down and listened. She had tried to fix it herself, but only made it worse. I nodded slowly and said, "Good. You tried. Now, let's fix it together." She blinked, stunned. "You're not mad." I smiled. "I'm grateful you told me. That's the culture I wanted. Not one where people whispered behind backs and feared retribution, but one where truth, even when messy, had a place. I'd spent too long in a world where mistakes were weapons. I wanted something better now. And when I saw my team flourish, innovate, and genuinely care about each other, that was my revenge. Not lawsuits or firings, but rising so far above the mess that the very air I breathed was cleaner. And I never let anyone poison it again. It was a rainy Thursday again, 1 year to the day since they fired me. I sat at my desk, staring out at the skyline. A team member walked in with a cupcake and a candle. "You survived your rebirth anniversary," she grinned. I laughed. I did more than survive. We lit the candle, and as I blew it out, I thought of everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. I didn't wish for success. I already had that. I wished for continued peace. That day, I posted a message online. Just a photo of my current office and the caption, "1 year ago, they thought they buried me." They didn't know I was a seed. The post went viral. Comments flooded in, people sharing their own rebirths, betrayals, and triumphs. Some even confessed they'd been the Chloe in someone else's story and wanted to change. I didn't expect that. But it reminded me, our stories don't just belong to us. They ripple. They inspire. They teach. I used to cry alone in bathrooms. Now people sent me messages saying I gave them courage. I didn't just rewrite my ending. I rewrote what survival looked like. Sometimes, people ask if I'd go back and change anything, avoid the betrayal, dodge the pain, stay safe. And honestly, no. Pain sharpens you. Betrayal teaches. And survival? Survival transforms. Without them, I might have stayed stuck. Comfortable. Small. They lit a match to burn me down, and instead, I used the fire to forge steel. Every sleepless night, every humiliating meeting, every whisper behind my back, those were bricks. I built my future from them. And when I see David now, if I ever do, I don't feel hatred. I feel distance. Like watching someone drown in a puddle they created. And Chloe? She's a shadow. Not even worth the light it takes to remember her fully. What matters now is my daughter's laugh, my team's joy, the legacy I'm building brick by brick. I don't need applause. I don't need revenge stories. I just need this. Waking up and knowing I chose myself, even when no one else did. That's power. That's peace. That's freedom. If you're watching this and you've ever felt discarded, underestimated, humiliated, remember this part. The part where I rose. The part where I built a life so rich, so steady, that even my enemies couldn't touch it. I don't share my story for pity or applause. I share it because someone out there needs to know they're not weak for breaking. They're strong for surviving. You don't have to roar to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest decision to leave, to rebuild, to let go, is the one that changes everything. You are not what they said about you. You're not the mistake they framed you as. You're a mosaic of every step forward you took when the world wanted you to stop. I used to think justice meant making them suffer. But now I know justice is living well and letting them watch. So, if you've made it this far, take this as your sign. Get up. Walk forward. You're allowed to take up space, to rebuild, to shine. And when they ask how you did it, tell them you stopped waiting for their permission. And now, if this story touched you, if you felt a lump in your throat or saw a piece of yourself somewhere in these words, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of rebirth, revenge, and redemption. Because you're not alone. We rise together here. In this space, your scars are not shameful. They're sacred proof that you survived. Comment below if you've been through something similar. Share your victory, your lesson, your spark. This channel isn't just about storytelling. It's about reclaiming your voice. So, wherever you are right now, curled up in grief, burning with anger, or standing in your power, know this. Your story matters. And maybe one day soon, you'll be the one writing your own severance papers, not for others, but for the version of yourself that doubted your worth. That's when true freedom begins. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep rising.